Shabbat Shalom, everybody. The last day has presented seriousness, senses of vulnerability. It's been challenging for us in a way that many of us haven't really experienced in our lifetime. The pictures, what we witnessed yesterday, taking place at the center, at the epicenter of American democracy, was reprehensible, was shameful, and raises such big questions about where we are as a country, about what values define America that we know and we love and that we're so grateful for. It raises so many questions. I've spent the last 24 hours speaking with colleagues, reflecting. I came to our sanctuary, though it stands here empty. I came to stand in this place to reflect and think about the ideas that made this place holy, to think about the values that define our community as a Kehila Kadosha, and to reflect upon the sense of loss, the sense of sadness, the sense of discomfort, of unknown that was introduced into our lives yesterday. As we begin to learn Sefer Shemos, we're reconnected, we're reintroduced to Moshe Rabbeinu. And wherever he turns, in the society that he lives in, he too witnesses violence. He sees a Mitzri beating a Jew. He sees a Jew fighting with a Jew. When he flees that society, comes to Midian, he goes straight to the well and says, maybe there's hope for this society. Let me go meet the people of Midian. And again, he witnesses shepherds beating, abusing the vulnerable daughters of Yitro. And so the Torah tells us Moshe flees into the desert away from society. Moshe gives up. And it's God himself who has to rehabilitate Moshe, who has to show him that two opposite things can still live together. There can be good, there can be hope, and there can be evil. Fire, a bush can be on fire, and the bush can still exist. There's a moment in the Torah, in the Parsha, that if you don't stop to think about it, you miss. But it really is very strange. When the daughters of Yitro return to Yitro, they say, you'll never believe it, Dad, Abba, you'll never believe it. We were saved by an Egyptian man, by an Ish Mitzri. Now you and I know there is nothing Egyptian about Moshe. This is a man who firmly rejected Egyptian society, Egyptian culture. So why does the Torah, for all of history, capture the daughters of Yisro's identification of him as an Ish Mitzri? The Seforno, classic important commentary on the Torah, says the daughters of Yisro were so used to living in a society that was abusive, in a society that had corrupt values. When they saw someone who stood up for them, when they saw someone who was driven by kindness, by generosity, they said, it must be he learned that in Egypt. It must be that he discovered in Egypt the value of generosity, the value of caring for the weak. That's why they identified him as an Ish Mitzri, because he's clearly not from this place. This is not a man who grew up in Midian and thinks about Midianite values and is defined by the corruption of our society. Now, what they didn't know is Moshe rejected Egyptian society. What they didn't know was Moshe had the values he had in spite of Egyptian society, not because of the incredible education he got there. But nevertheless, his role as someone who stood for generosity, who stood for kindness, who stood for peace and connection, was so noticeable that it left such a deep impression that Yitro turns around and says, that's the man I want in my family. That's the man I want my daughter to marry. I've really struggled. I've really struggled with colleagues to figure out what are the right words for this moment. What will be comforting? What will be reassuring? What does the Torah say on how we should react to this moment? I'm not sure I have the right words, except that our mission, our purpose, to bring goodness into this world, to be generous, to be kind, to teach a society like the Midianite society, that we can take care of the vulnerable, that we can engage in dialogue, is truer today than ever before. This has to be a priority of each of us. When Moshe says, to Hashem, don't send me, I can't do it. Hashem says, you don't have the liberty to think you're free of the responsibility. Just because you look at society and you think it's corrupt, you can't leave them. And so too we. We're living in a desperately difficult time in terms of the values that define this country. And it's incumbent upon us to continue the godly message that we have to be kind and generous to each other. And that dialogue and that conversation, that seeing the B'Tselem Elokim, the image of God in every single person, has to be a value that defines the society we want to see in this great country. Growing up as a child in England, I remember looking at America as the place where movies were made and dreams came true. America stands for so much. It represents so much. And it's up to us. It's up to us to talk about the soul of our country and to vulnerably share, this is what I think. What do you think? To model like Moshe, who took a stand and said, these are the defining values, but then sat with Yitro, engaged, I like to think engaged in discussion and dialogue. Yitro, the seeker and the searcher, would not have brought Moshe into his family had he not seen that Moshe himself had deep beliefs and Moshe had deep humility. We need to remain humble. And we need to remain hopeful. Our mission, as Rabbi Sachs, I like to think as Rabbi Sachs would have said it, our mission is to reintroduce into our culture the idea of dignity, the idea that we have to be dignified, dignified in our democracy, dignified in our conversations and our discussions, and dignified in our disagreements. I hope and I pray that the days and the weeks ahead will bring us that sense of dignity that has defined this country as so remarkable, as so kind and generous to us and to all people. And Amir Tzah Hashem, please God, soon we'll see a United States of America and we'll be able to say we're proud. We're proud of where our country is going and what our country is becoming. What values define us. Wishing each of you a Shabbat Shalom, a reminder that we are terribly still very much in the throes of this pandemic. Please stay strong and commit to fulfilling the mitzvah of Shmartem Ma'odes Nafshosechem, to protect human life, to wear a mask and to keep distances. It's so critical, it's so more important now than ever before. It's so exhausting and it's so hard, but it is such a definitional mitzvah. It will change the course of who we are if we can be mekayim that mitzvah so thoughtfully and so deliberately. Wishing you each a Shabbat Shalom, a Shabbat of peace, a Shabbat of shleimut, of completeness, and a Amir Tzah Hashem, a Shabbat of good health.